Hello students. In the last video clip that I posted, I talked about decision making and some of the issues and the processes necessary to make proper decisions. One of the things that oftentimes comes up in decision making is the issue of solving problems, because we have to make decisions about problematic areas that fall on business. And so tonight I want to, or today or whatever, I want to specifically talk about the issues of solving problems. Now, problem solving is something that is very essential that we all learn how to do and do reasonably well. If you're going to be successful in business or in life for that matter, you have to learn how to solve problems and do it in a manner in which you are going to get hopefully the very best outcome that one can expect. So that's what I want to talk about here. From the first slide that I have in this set of slides, it talks about the necessary of having good high order thinking skills if we're going to work out issues and problems that come to mind. It's a basic skill that you have to have. I don't care whether you're a manager or what you're doing, you're going to run into issues, things that are going to have to be resolved, and that's what I want to talk about here. And it can be sometimes very simple, sometimes rather complex, but regardless, you need to make sure that you have those skills, okay? So what is problem solving? Well, the problem is, first, the biggest problem of problem solving, and it's been said, and I tend to agree, that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And I may have said that in the decision-making video clip, but if I didn't, well, it's still true. You need to be able to define what the problem is. Is it a problem that we need to deal with? Is it a problem that is critically important? Is it a problem that's important? Is it a problem that's somewhat important, or is it a problem that really doesn't matter much? So we have to be able to make this decision, and this requires good critical and creative thinking skills. We'll talk about that in the next video, okay? So we have to make sure that we understand how we can put the importance of the decision, of the problem, in its proper perspective. And I've provided you in this next slide with what is called the Eisenhower Matrix PowerPoint template, which shows exactly, is named after President Eisenhower, who was General Eisenhower in World War II, how he would classify issues that came up, problems that came up, relative to their importance to the outcome of the organization or to the urgency that was necessary to deal with the problem. Some problems are very important, but not urgent, as you can see from this slide. So if it is one of these situations that's completely urgent and we really have to deal with it soon, urgent and important, do it now. That's the time frame. This is important. One of the first things we have to do. If it's important but not urgent, try to determine, make a decision about when are we going to deal with this issue. If it's urgent but not important, I like this one. If you're a good manager, you delegate it. You give it to a subordinate. That's what Eisenhower would do. If it wasn't important, not urgent, forget it. Not necessary. So you have to be able to make that kind of a classification. And the way you do that is understanding what is the current situation. What is the situation we're in right now? Okay? What do we know? What do we know about this situation? Is it one of these things that, and do we know what's going on and who's involved and when are these things happening and how are things happening? When are they happening? Where are they happening? These are questions that we have to be able to answer. And in order to really understand a situation, in order to define the situation to a point where you can make a decision about it, you have to be able to make this classification of how relevant this issue is. What do we know about it? What don't we know about it? Well, if we don't know much about it, we better find something out, especially if we determine that it's very important and very urgent. We got to deal with it and deal with it rather quickly, which means that we're going to have to get information and get information rather quickly. Where are we going to get it? How are we going to get it? That's one of the things this course is about. What are the sources of information that you can get? Where are the sources of information you can have? And how trustworthy are those sources of information? Every business has to have good information. We've seen that. And solving problems requires good information. If you don't have good information, you can't define the problem statement. And a problem statement should be clear. It should be understood by everybody who's dealing in the situation and the issue, okay? The one thing that is absolutely imperative is that we can define the problem. If we have to, write out the problem so we can share it with people. Remember, there are only two reasons, basically, to ever write anything down: to remember and to share. When you're dealing with information, that's important to remember, okay? Because same things that we need to remember or that we want to share with people. And so we need to make sure that when we're dealing with an issue like that, we can write down the problem. We can make a problem statement. And here is the kicker. Oftentimes, when we're dealing with problems, we don't deal with the root cause. The root cause. You got that? What do I mean by the root cause? I mean the thing or the person or whatever is creating the problem. We understand what it is. What is the root cause? Why are these things happening? What is it about this situation that is causing this? Now, oftentimes it's not obvious. This is a problem. So many times I have dealt with issues working with people, working as a consultant, working in various ways, where people are treating the symptoms, but not the root cause. And it is absolutely essential that before you ever start to tackle a situation, that you have determined you are at the root cause. And how do you do that? Well, there's a variety of tools that can be used. I've listed a couple of them here. One of them is the 5 W's and H. Remember always the 5 W's and H. I'll talk about that later on as well. What are the 5 W's? When, where, who, what. The H is how, and the 5th W is why. If you can answer these questions about an issue, about a problem, the problem's half solved. There are other ways of doing it. I've given you, for instance, you can use what's called an affinity diagram. As we study, as we assess, we need to go in and we need to analyze situations. And we'll talk a lot about analyzing situations, because when we work with systems, we have to be able to analyze those systems to see if they're working properly, see where potential problems are. That's why this is so important. This is a major aspect of this course, of information systems. You have to understand problems are going to arise. If you've ever used a computer, I suspect most of you have, since you're using one right this minute, have you ever had a problem with it? I'll bet you have. Because we always have. One of the things, a great reality of information systems is you use them, you're going to have a problem with them. Guarantee it. It's going to happen. Just the way it works. So we have to make sure that we have defined the root cause. It's essential. The next slide shows an example of how you can have what is called an affinity diagram, where you take an issue and you start to drill down into the issue until you get to the bottom line, the basis. This is where you determine what the root cause of a situation is, using a tool like this, or you just simply answering those questions. And the questions, the 5 W's and the H, so important you learn how to do this and do it properly. It is. Now, we have all kinds of questions we can have when we're trying to determine information about solving a problem. There are basically 3 types of questions: open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, and leading questions. And they all have their place. Open-ended questions are basically questions where you ask a question that is broad enough, but yet pointed about the issue, that people can basically express what they know and what they're feeling about a situation. It's very important. An open-ended question leaves, as the name implies, it leaves the answerer, the person that's being questioned, it gives them the freedom, it gives them the ability to go out and answer the question as they want. It's a little time consuming oftentimes, but you generally get pretty good results if you can answer. And if you can answer, if you're not in a hurry, this is a good way to do it. Open-ended questions. The next type of questions, the close-ended questions, are those questions which can be answered yes or no. Binary questions sometimes. I used to have a colleague who worked in the computing services. I don't know if I told you, but I worked in the University Computing Services for over 30 years. And in that process, we run into all kinds of interesting people. Well, we had one person that worked there, and you'd always have to answer him a binary question, very closed-ended. So he could either go or. You didn't like to talk much. But if you could put everything in a yes-no question, you could get an answer from him. And generally speaking, it was a pretty good answer. The trouble with a closed-end question is you're not going to get much information. It may be good, it may be accurate, but you're not going to get much. The third type, the leading question, are questions that you ask that have sort of a pointed direction to them, so that you are kind of prompting the responder in a specific way so that they're going to say pretty much what you expect them to say. Now, that can be good or bad, depending upon how the person is responding and depending upon the situation. They can be problematic, as they can lead to slanted, biased results. And we want to fight bias at every chance we can. Bias is not necessarily a good thing, as we'll see in the next video clip. Okay? So those are the 3 kinds of questions that we can kind of ask. But remember, what we're trying to do is determine the 5 W's and the H, the who, when, what, why, how, etc. And we do this so that we can apply this to solving the problem. Now, problem solving, there's lots of different ways of going about problem solving, just like there's a lot of ways to make decisions. Decision making, in a sense, is problem solving, but problem solving has some idiosyncrasies that are a little bit different. A little bit. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. First of all, I want you to understand, I'm going to give you a series of about 7 steps here, but these steps are not linear. What I mean, you don't have to do them boom, 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't have to be done that way. You can move them around however it works until you finally get a result. Number 7's applying the result. But how you get there, it's not etched in stone. Trust me. It's useful. It's a useful technique. That's why I'm giving it to you. pretty tried and true. Over the course of this semester, I'll give you several different ways about going about things. But you don't have to always follow this process. It's just a useful process to have, okay? So, problem steps. First and foremost, we just already talked about this, but this is critical. Identify the issues. Make sure you have a good problem statement so everybody who's dealing with this understands exactly what's going on. So important. You have to do that, okay? Number two, who are the stakeholders? Who are the people involved? What are their interests? You have to understand this because people are going to have a different perspective depending upon who they are and how they're involved. And we all have different perceptions, and as you well know, perception is a reality to a lot of people. So we have to understand who are these people, who are the players, the stakeholders. The stakeholder is a person who has a vested interest in this process, and be able to make sure that we can do that, okay? Then we have to come up with, and this is in decision making, we come up with lots of alternatives. In this case, what are the potential solutions to the problem? And we want as many of these as we can possibly get. And how do you get them? Well, there's lots of different ways of doing it. But this is where creativity comes into play, and I'll be talking about that in the next video clip, as I told you. But brainstorming, where you work with a bunch of people and you throw out wild and crazy ideas, and you'll learn about this as you go along. But understand, this is an important technique that people can use when they are going about coming up with lots of different solutions to a problem, or lots of different alternatives to decision, if you prefer decision making, okay? Then, just as in the decision making, because this is decision making, then you evaluate each of these options. Some of them are good, some of them won't be so good, and you weight them on the pros and the cons, what's good and what isn't so good, okay? I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. I talked about it in the previous video. Then you select an option that you think is probably going to be the best option for this situation. How do you do that? With lots of information and experience. Remember we talked about the knowledge cycle, where we start with data, convert it to information. Information becomes knowledge when it's tempered with experience. Well, we got to experience these things, do them again, again, again. That's why managers don't start at the top, typically. You got to earn the experience. If we had an experience bill, it'd be great, but we don't have such a animal. So anyway, you have to determine what is the best possible solution. Make sure that you document the whole process. This is important, especially working with a group of people. Why are we doing what we're doing? You need to answer that question. The why is always important. You know, I've told people, you know, of the 5 W's and the H, from my perspective, why is the most important. Because if you can understand why, then the rest of it can be pretty much explained. Okay? So it's important that you understand, that you document this, then implement it, monitor it, and evaluate the process. Just like decision making. It's exactly what it is. So the whole process here is to make sure, as a problem solver, you are aware about the situation, and most assuredly aware about you, yourself. Understand, to do this and to do it properly, it takes learning. You have to learn how to think in manners that are well developed. Thinking processes, critical thinking, creative thinking. Next video clip that I'm going to post, may post the two together, but I hope you watch them in sequence, because it makes more sense, I think, if you watch them in that sequence. But the ability to think critically and to think creatively is absolutely essential not only in making good decisions, but in solving problems, which is, again, decision making, but in every other aspect of your life, whether in business or whether personal life. It's very important. Know who you are. Understand the things that you do well and do them well.